Stay tuned to learn more about student interest in blockchain technology. Reimagine 2020.
My name is Jeff McDonald. I am the co-founder of the NEM Foundation. We started in early 2017. I'm also a NEM core team member since 2014, since before we launched in 2015. And I am the co-founder of luxtag.io. We do track and trace on the blockchain.
Hey everybody, you have Patrick McLain here again, one of your hosts for Reimagine 2020. Bringing you a special guest, Jeff McDonald. He's been in the space for a while. I think he's touched a lot of different aspects of it. And I think these kind of conversations are important. I'm excited to have this one. You know, I think especially for some of the new students kind of thinking about their careers and do they want to factor blockchain into that? It's always good to kind of hear a little bit of the evolution, you know, kind of how we got here. So today we're bringing you a McDouble. You have McLain and you have McDonald. Before I butcher it anymore, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to pass it to Jeff. Jeff, introduce yourself to everybody and, tell them a little bit about what your job is and what your day-to-day looks like and how your evolution kind of got you to this point in blockchain.
Sure, yeah. I got into Bitcoin in 2013. I was super fascinated about all the possibilities that blockchain could bring. And then in 2014, I became a core team member of the NEM team. And then in 2016, I was the co-founder of the NEM Foundation, and that launched in 2017. So I'm here. I've been super fascinated with blockchain, not just as money, but as a blockchain that can do all kinds of advanced business development. NEM launched in 2015, and I'm super excited because our NEM 2.0, which is what we call Symbol, is launching this year in 2020 after 4 years of development.
Well, congratulations. I'm sure you guys, after 4 years, I'm sure you have a big package to kind of drop on everyone.
We do.
So maybe some people listening to this right now have heard of NEM before and are very familiar with it. Maybe some people kind of know about NEM and they don't really have a true understanding of it. Maybe some people don't know anything about it. So you kind of just give us your take on NEM, you know, as condensed as you can make it, and maybe take us through a little bit of that journey, right? Since I think 2015, you know, how has NEM's evolution happened, and where are you guys kind of at today?
Well, I guess one of the defining features of NEM is that it's an API-driven blockchain. And what I mean by that is that whenever you're doing smart contracts, you don't actually have to write a whole bunch of code from scratch. You can use a JSON RESTful API call. And so one of the examples I like to give is, let's say my partners and I, and we're going to create a multi-sig account on the blockchain. And then we want to fund it. And then we need to create a security token. And then we want to name that security token, give it a cool name. And then we want to distribute that to 100 of our investors. Now, normally, if you want to do that on a lot of other blockchains, you basically have to have a PhD in coding, and you need to be an experienced programmer, because if you're going to try to put multi-sig and funding and creating a security token and distributing it all into one contract. In fact, even just doing one of those things is hard to do. And for some people, it doesn't even always work and they lose their money. But in NEM, we're going to be able to do all of those things. And really, the lowest level developer can do it. And even in fact, a lot of people that aren't even developers can do that and do it with 100% security. And this is something that we've been doing for a long time. We pioneered this on NEM 1.0, where none of our contracts have ever broken. We've never lost a single coin after 5 years, after securing billions of dollars. And Symbol, which was our 2.0, takes it to a whole new level. And so we believe that you shouldn't have to be a complicated, really experienced programmer to do some really cool things on the blockchain. This example that I just gave is called an aggregate transaction, and it's essentially a one-time smart contract. You can put it all together into one transaction that happens in one block under one transaction hash and is announced to the network in its entirety, that example I just gave, or not at all. It's not like we get halfway through executing that code and then there's a bug that's found and then it goes wrong. It either all works or it doesn't. And then once it executes, it has finality, meaning that code doesn't exist in perpetuity forever on the blockchain, hoping that it'll always be secure, that no bug will be found in the future. Once it executes, there's settlement, it's final, it's a one and done smart contract. And so this API approach to a blockchain makes things super secure, super easy, and fundamentally gives developers a lot of options that they can access on day one.
Well, I think you bring us an interesting point, right? Especially there's a lot of students listening right now and think about how they're going to approach blockchain, or maybe they have a initial interest in it, and how do they start diving in, right? And I think we've kind of consistently found these barriers of blockchain where, Ethereum kind of kicked off Solidity, and then you have to learn a new programming language, right? Where traditional developers, which are almost all developers, they use things like you're saying, like JSON responses, whether you're building an application with Google Maps, right? It's a simple JSON response you get back. And these are the kind of common formats that developers are used to and kind of help them rapidly innovate. So I have a question. Obviously, I think sometimes people get confused. There's almost too many different blockchain options, and how do you pick? In a most condensed way, what is NEM's purpose? What is NEM's selling point in a nutshell?
Well, NEM is not the most famous, and it doesn't have the highest market cap. So that's definitely not our selling point. But our selling point is definitely rock solid security and ease of use.
I'm not sure the most market cap or the most famous equals success nowadays. Yeah, and sometimes I think it might be opposite.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that's exactly true. And we are here for the long game. Like NEM has always never partaken in a pump and dump. We've always been about blockchain adoption and providing a real blockchain that does real things. And so developers, basically, we offer them this SDK, which makes things incredibly easy for them to build off of. And another thing that NEM has, which is kind of fascinating, that a lot of blockchains haven't approached, is we basically have, in our multi-tiered architecture, we have two databases. And most blockchains don't have two databases. We have a RocksDB, which is used for the blockchain itself, where we store all the information from all the blocks and the transactions. And that's really good for the security and the cryptography. But then we have a MongoDB. So all that information in RocksDB is taken out of Rocks, and then it's reformatted and reorganized in MongoDB, which a lot of developers are very familiar with working on MongoDB. It's one of the most versatile, one of the most famous open source databases.
It's unstructured data, right? Like no SQL, essentially.
Yes, yes. And that's good because every time there's a fork to the blockchain, that doesn't have to be reorganized from scratch. You can kind of add more data to it as you go, and it can just take it. Right. And so, and it also is really useful for doing queries. So in most blockchains, traditionally with a one database model, you can query information by a transaction hash. Maybe you can transaction or query data by a block, right? And say, give me the transactions in this block, or give me the transactions for this transaction hash. But with a MongoDB, all of a sudden, you get to do some really wonderful queries where you can say, how many times did Jeff make a transaction with Alice? How many times did Jeff use this security token? Just show me all the transactions for the security token and only the security token. right? You get to do wonderful relationships or wonderful queries to find out data, and MongoDB can handle that. So it becomes very easy if you made a security token and you want to use that in your dApp to query MongoDB to find out what's going on with it.
Got it. So I want to pivot to a few other points. I want to talk about, what you guys are doing with Symbol and kind of how you guys are thinking about developers, right? How you're making it easier for them to kind of attract the, innovation rapidly. But one last question, kind of on the point of NEM. Obviously, not many companies have been around since 2015 in the blockchain space. Obviously, you guys have seen a lot of turmoil. You mentioned earlier, not the highest market cap, right? And these were maybe some of the older metrics that we were looking at. Can you tell us a bit about the NEM journey and maybe how those external forces or external perceptions of either blockchain in general, or the only thing that mattered was the highest coin price, right? How has that journey kind of been for you guys? What have you learned from it? What have you decided is not really important, right? You're not going to get stuck in the weeds with conversations that aren't necessarily relevant to success. What's that journey kind of been like for you guys?
I mean, it's been fascinating. NEM started off as a thread. We didn't even have our own website. We were just a thread on a website called Bitcoin Talk, which is a forum where people would talk about blockchain. And we were delegated to kind of the back even of that website. You had to dig to find where we were at. And we started there, and after we launched, we had built up a community. We joined Telegram. We started to get real members, and then we started to focus in on doing NEM 101s all over the world and community building. So it was really fascinating to see NEM grow from what was originally just a bunch of people on a thread on someone else's website to become a real community. And we gained a lot of people in Japan, Malaysia, some other countries, Europe, America. And then eventually we were able to, form a business end. And the business end started to help with business development, and the foundation was involved with that, as well as community development. And now we've reached this new stage where with Symbol, we're making a NEM group, which is essentially kind of like a conglomerate of different brother and sister organizations. And we have an investment arm, a trading desk, a software company. And so we have these different branches that are working together in an ecosystem to make NEM and Symbol the best it can be. And it's been just completely fascinating watching kind of NEM grow from this website to a community to now like a full-fledged conglomerate of businesses.
If you could go back in time 3, 4, 5 years, what advice would you give 3 years ago, Jeff?
I would tell anybody that's starting off that it's really easy to talk about blockchain and really hard.
Blockchain is not easy to build.
Yeah, it's not easy to build. It is super easy to say that you have an idea and you're going to build it. And the funny thing is you can get 98% of the way there. You can get 99% of the way there. And then on that last 1%, realize that there was a fault or a mistake, and you have to go back and redesign. And you literally can't launch a blockchain or a smart contract that works 99.99% of the time. If you do that 0.001% of the time that it doesn't work is the one time that everybody loses all their money. And so this is an industry where there's a lot of great ideas, but it's not given, there's not a lot of allowance for people to make mistakes or be error prone. So it has to work all the time. And that's why it's so difficult to actually build and do correctly. So I would say be patient, have a lot of planning, have great developers, and know that there'll probably be lots of delays and audits and and all kinds of stuff like that. And then I would also say, get as many experienced people as possible. With NEM, we were all experienced in our own ways, but not in the blockchain industry. And there, I mean, to be fair, there weren't a lot of people back then that were experienced with what it was like to start a blockchain company, but there are now. And so having some people that are experienced and not having the whole organization be only newbies, you know, having somebody with a name and history is a big part. And if you look at some of the more successful blockchains, whether it be something like Ethereum or Stellar or EOS, all of those were founded by people that it wasn't their first blockchain. They'd all done one or two rodeos before. Cardano, another example, right? So these are, having that experience is really important.
100%. It's actually something I try to tell people. You know, I've been in technology most of my life since I was a kid, many startups, and I live in Silicon Valley. I've seen, you know, I've seen a decent amount of it. I live in that little bubble, and it kind of came to blockchain. And it's just like, you know, we started partially, some of our team is just building an engineering arm, right? Saying that, hey, there's not a lot of developers. And at first kind of approaching it like, why aren't there a lot of developers, right? Fast forward 3 years, and I think in the last year, we've done, I don't know, 150,000 hours, right? A blockchain development across multiple projects, some internal, external. And it's the conclusion I've come to. I look at people sometimes and I'm like, they don't understand, right? Like, I think we're really segregated where it's like you have some of the community who's like buying coins, they want to trade it, they're looking to make money, right? It's more of a financial motivation for them. You kind of have some of the technology evangelists or, you know, people that are really interested in kind of the future there. Maybe there was some bad rapport or feelings because of, you know, call them scams or just what happened with money getting passed around. Not a lot of execution, I think, in a lot of ways. But at the end of the day, it is hard. It is hard to build this decentralized future, right? Which, as I look at it sometimes, I'm okay with that, right? Like, if it was easy, then what are we talking about, right? Like, are we actually innovating? Are we actually building something new? Or it's just grab some duct tape and a weekend hackathon and you know, we have a decentralized application, right? So it's hard to keep many devices in sync with not a shared set of data that value, you know, that trust each other. And, you know, so just anyone listening and kind of as Jeff's saying, I think we need to respect that more, right? Like, what was this evolution? Like, I don't even think we're there yet, right? Like, we're going to continue to still realize things that we didn't realize yesterday, right? So kind of going to my next question. You mentioned earlier, one thing that you guys are able to do was kind of start to pull out some business use cases, which maybe give you guys a, you know, a bit of a clear vision. How do you define that? Like, what are these business use cases for you? What does that look like? Is it in the enterprise space? What's exciting you there?
Right. So basically, anybody who needs to make sure that they have a verifiable audit trail, who's doing international transactions, you know, that could be a good use case. So one of the kind of nice use cases that's already been announced on Symbol that I like is the Central Bank of Lithuania is doing a small but really wonderful project on Symbol, which is to making commemorative silver coins. So they've picked, like, I think it's about 20 of their past famous people that have contributed to Lithuania. And then they have made coins about them. And then the way it works on the blockchain is you collect different tokens or different points. And when you can conglomerate enough of these points together, you can redeem them for certain coins. Depending on what collections you have on the blockchain, then it becomes redeemable for these real silver coins. But there's also use cases like Loyal Coin in the Philippines, who does loyalty points on the blockchain for NEM, the first version. That's a wonderful point. And one of the great things about doing loyalty points is that in theory, it allows you to trade one loyalty point with one company with another loyalty point with another company, as long as they're under the same umbrella and in the same ecosystem. And then of course, there's also the idea of having different banks use this as a consortium. My company, LuxTag, we do track and trace. And so we've been able to secure different items on the blockchain. We've done Swiss-made hand watches. And we've also done a partnership with the Ministry of Education to secure diplomas on the blockchain. And so that's...
How are you guys binding those physical elements to the blockchain? Where they're using RFID?
So there's two ways with LuxTag. Our first version of LuxTag, of the product we call Papyrus, which is what we use to do diplomas. Basically, we had them printing an extra QR code on the certificate, but now we're using OCR technology, which basically someone can just scan the diploma, it'll read the text and then query the blockchain. Again, like I said, we have this MongoDB for that text, and then it'll point to where that blockchain is, where that certificate is recorded. And then we have it. And one of the things that's different about what we're doing is most people that are doing what we call proof of existence is just taking the document and making a hash, and then storing that on the blockchain. Is basically a simple timestamp. But we're actually creating a non-fungible asset for each item that contains its content and can be searched. And that non-fungible asset can actually be created by the Ministry of Education, transferred to the university, and then transferred to the student, and you can see that provenance and track it through the blockchain. And then again, it can be searched by the text only. So that's one of our wonderful products at LuxTag called Papyrus.
Got it. We have about 10 minutes here, and I have another question or two around adoption, especially in the enterprise space, because I think I'm always intrigued at what are the obstacles to adoption, and I find that they're not necessarily technologically based. Like I feel like there's enough tech out there to kind of execute, right? It's more there's a lot of nascent or just structural issues, right? And we do a bit in corporate innovation where it's like, I feel like some companies, they might have a blockchain cheerleader or evangelist internally, right? So maybe this guy's kicking off a project, maybe he leaves and with him goes the motivation to the project, right? Or maybe some company joins a coalition that they were a little bit late to, and they feel like their interests aren't being as catered to as the core founders, right? So when I look at the ways that enterprise companies have kind of approached how they want to adopt blockchain, I see a bit of fragility around the success of pilots. And I've really started to look at what are the roadblocks to just making pilots happen, right? Because I think one of the things of blockchain is it's like everybody is still waiting, like, does blockchain work? What's the proof? Show it to me. So it's like on one side, I feel like the blockchain space kind of needs this validation to just show the data and say, here's our results, right? And unilaterally, they don't have that reach where a lot of these companies could theoretically flip a switch, right? And show, okay, here's 1 trillion transactions on X process and supply chain or whatever. What do you guys see as you interact with these companies? Like what tend to be some of the roadblocks? Like if you could change anything you wanted, what would you change? Or if there's any, I know for a fact there's about 100 industry leaders signing up to watch this. What would you tell them? Like how should they be thinking about approaching blockchain?
I would say there's 3 things that I'm always looking at whenever I'm looking at a project, and it typically tends to be a deal breaker for at least one of the 3. And the first, as you mentioned, is the technology, but that's oftentimes the easiest part. With NEM, as I said, it's so easy to build on with our APIs and our SDKs that a lot of times, if you want to do something, it's already ready out of the box. You just have to code the front end. So the second thing, and this is a big problem with anything that involves money, is making sure that it's regulated, licensed, and legal. So getting the lawyers to approve anything that has to do with money is extremely complicated. And so that's really a hurdle that a lot of people come into, is where they're saying, I'm going to do a blockchain company, we're going to solve all those problems, but it turns out it's not legal at all. And it won't be licensed, and it won't be recognized in any territory. And in fact, if someone tried to do that, they would go to jail. The third thing that's a really big problem is getting industry partners to deploy and roll out, or getting government partnerships. So, even if you have the technology, even if it's licensed and legal, do you have the support of the government and the industry? So for instance, like diplomas, if I was going to stamp diplomas and put a hash on the blockchain, or do a non-fungible asset to represent that certificate, it doesn't matter unless the Ministry of Education represents it. I can put provenance of a car on a blockchain, but unless that's adopted by Tesla or GM or BMW, and it's an official GM or Tesla or BMW product, then people won't respect it and people won't use it. So you have to get these major players involved. Just because you can build something in a hackathon, that's really just a small part of the way of getting it deployed into the hands of people in the real world.
All great points. And I want to respect your time, and we could probably do this forever.
Definitely.
I want to get to Symbol in a second, but I want to hit one last point on what you just said. So as we talk about governments, as we talk about, legislation, regulatory sandboxes, I think even as a company we invested in that's in rewards, right? I think it's even interesting, even just trying to give people tokens as rewards, right? You run into regulatory issues. Do you guys find, and if I'm not mistaken, I think you guys are starting to build your influence in Latin America, correct?
Mm-hmm. Pedro is in Latin America, yeah.
Yep. So do you guys, what's your take on certain geographies that are very open, you think, certain, maybe some that aren't so much? And what are the trends there that you think are kind of positively impacting the space?
Latin America is a great area to be exploring right now, because blockchain kind of came in late to Latin America, and they're catching on to it now. Like the idea, had been in America and Europe for a long time, then came to Asia, and now it's come to Latin America, and they're very open-minded. They're ready to adopt, and they're ready to use this in their business practices. And so it's just, when I go there and I see how open-minded people are and ready to really deploy something, both at the government level, like I said, or at the developer standpoint, where you have these developer companies that are ready to get into blockchain, and even industries that are willing to accept it. It's a very open market right now that's willing to try and test blockchain. And anything that they can do to kind of create efficiency and transparency, I think is something that they're going to welcome, especially the auditability and the transparency, and making something reliable is something that they're really interested in right now in South America.
And do you see it as, and I kind of laugh, because I really do believe, I lived in Tanzania for many years, right? But 10 years ago, where I saw M-Pesa kind of take hold, this is kind of a moment in time that always stuck with me, right? And when I look at LATAM, and I look at, developing countries, I believe that these are going to be the first countries to adopt, right? Like it kind of, they seem the most open to it. There's potentially less barriers. There's potentially less legacy systems, less in past investments or less friction, or lobbyists that are really have interests that might not be in the best interest of the general population.
Yeah.
What are some geography? Go ahead. Sorry.
And experiments with special economic zones. So all of those things that you mentioned, there's less hurdles. So if you want to do a security token in the United States, it's extremely complicated because all of the laws that we have here, and I'm an American, right? But if you want to do a security token in a Latin American country, depending on who you're dealing with or your connections, you could talk to a minister in the government. I've personally met many ministers of many different governments around the world, in countries, because they were more open and welcoming. As a smaller country, as a poorer country, if they see a way to get money into the country and utilize their special economic zone, a lot of times these ministers are willing to meet with the head of a blockchain company personally. Where if I wanted to meet with one of the ministers, like the Minister of Health for the United States, and do a health-related blockchain, that's simply not going to happen. But if I want to meet with the Minister of Health of a small country, that is a connection that can happen. And once I get their support, it becomes a lot easier to roll that project out. I think you're muted.
Sometimes I make mistakes. So we have about, I think, 5-6 minutes here. I want to hear about kind of your guys' next evolution. So I want to give you the floor to, talk about what you guys are doing with Symbol. And then after that, I want to kind of just pivot a bit to, if you're a student coming through today, what's some advice you might give, the students watching this and as they're trying to choose their career path and how they would think about blockchain. But we'd like to hear, tell us about Symbol and why it matters.
Right, so Symbol has been focused on security, security, security. So if a developer wants a very easy platform to build on, then they're going to be able to do that with Symbol. And we've done a lot of great contracts, which I mentioned before, like aggregated contracts where you can aggregate all these things, but we have multi-sig, essentially what is multi-sig 2.0, which is giant multi-sig trees that go through multiple levels. We have metadata that you can put on accounts. We have account restrictions, which is like business rules of what an account can and can't do. And all of these are kind of assembled in a toolbox that make it super easy for developers to build on, while at the same time having an architecture that underlies this, which is all fascinating. And this is all like ready. We are open for business right now. Everything's open source on GitHub. It can all be verified, viewed, tested, and we're just, finally, we've already been forked and somebody has already launched a live network off of our code, even though we at the NEM group haven't even launched it. But it's good code, it's ready, and we're super excited to see that launched out this year. That's Symbol, and of course, all the documentation's already on the website for people to review and go through.
So quick question on Symbol. Why was it created as a separate blockchain, and what can it do that NEM wasn't necessarily designed for or evolved kind of from what your lessons from NEM?
So originally, the kind of thought was it was just going to be a major upgrade, a major hard fork. But along the way, there were a lot of design decisions made that just made it incompatible. So there was a decision to be made between making it compatible and it taking longer and Symbol not being the best it could be, or speeding up the process and making Symbol the best it could be. And Symbol's already been in development for 4 years. Nobody really wants to wait a 6th or 7th year to make it backwards compatible with NEM. But again, like I said, there's this 2 database model. There's been a lot of extra cryptography that's been added. That's kind of the latest and the greatest in the field of academic study of cryptography. The way that we announce and do smart contracts, it's not backwards compatible with the way that NEM did it. Now, while at the user level, a lot of this looks the same, and say the wallet on the back end, how it's happening is completely different. And so there was just a lot of choices to be made, but we've added a lot of great tech. And look, NEM is really underappreciated, I believe. Now I'm biased, obviously, but it was underappreciated because—
No. Tell me about that. It's one thing I'm actually kind of asking a lot of people, and I think it's a good time to reflect, what is the perception of NEM? And if you could go online and reply back to people and they could be on this call and you could answer their questions, what would you tell them?
Well, one of the things that I typically hear is when someone's going through the list of blockchains, they will say, and this one does smart contracts, or this one's for IoT, or this one's for, international remittance or whatever. And here's NEM, and I don't know what NEM is. And that's because a lot of people haven't taken the time to do the deep dive to find out just how fascinating technology was. One of the problems that NEM had is instead of doing one thing, it did many things. And so while it could do track and trace or loyalty points or silver coins or whatever, because it had so many different ways that it could go, it wasn't ever defined as this one thing of a blockchain. And we didn't initially have a lot of money to market it very well and put that out. And so it never really got the attention, but a lot of innovative features, a lot of things that other blockchains still aren't doing today were created in 2015, and then Symbol in 2020 is adding a whole new slew of firsts that nobody's ever done before. So, and
so do you believe it? And sometimes like I kind of wonder this, like, you and I were talking before, I'm a hacker on one side, and on the other side, I'm like, I could speak in the business or marketing world. And I kind of look at it, and maybe one of the things I always look at is like really distilling things down for people. And when I look at a lot of the blockchain world, or the companies have raised money and maybe reached X amount of validation or adoption, I kind of pull it out into what you just said. Like, sometimes I think that it's literally like a marketing or a messaging issue, right? And maybe we'll take this as another example. Like, if you could go back in time a bit, would there be some things in relating your message to the public that you guys would have, obviously hindsight's 2020, but like, and this might not even apply just to you guys, but do you think that there's blockchain companies in general need to do a better job of distilling things down, making sure their points are heard, or is there too much noise out there that everything kind of gets lost? Where do you kind of draw the line there?
Well, there's definitely too much noise. So I'll answer the first part. I would say, picking one area and trying to capture that, like Hyperledger is doing a really good job with supply chain. But picking one thing.
I'm not exactly sure. I'm hearing from a bunch of I'm not sure a bunch of their customers are happy, to be completely honest with you.
Well, that's completely true. But they've done a really good job marketing it and getting people to sign on and test and do POCs, but you don't see it in the real world in people's hands. So on my company in LuxTag, you can download our app, and there's real products you can buy off the internet and scan with them because it really works, right? But I would say trying to focus in on one physical territory, whether that's a country or a city or even a block, one street, and get everybody on that street to adapt that blockchain technology. That's one way. Or one digital landscape. Bitcoin did a really good job with dark markets, which, it is what it is. It's not necessarily the best use case, but for a long time, it was the driving technology that allowed that to happen. So I would say making sure that someone's focused on what they want to accomplish with their blockchain and where it's going to be deployed is really important. But I would also say, as far as the noise thing that you mentioned, there's way too much noise. And one of the problems that we struggled with is I would get on stage.
Well, and wait 1 second. Yeah. Do you think the noise is educated noise, or is it like non-educated noise, like at volume?
It's just like everything on Twitter these days. It's non-educated noise. It's people making up their own theory. It's couch scientists, blockchain couch engineers. Someone who's never even coded a hello world all of a sudden considers themselves a blockchain developer, and they're going.
But they read a white paper.
Yes, and this is the problem: is that other people's hypothetical blockchain is way better in their white paper than my real blockchain that's deployed with a live network. And so I'll get on stage and I'll explain what we do, and then someone else will get on stage and explain what they're going to do, which they can't. Because like I said, it's very hard to actually deploy, and they can't. But then people walk away and they're like, I'm not going to use NEM because I'm going to wait for this other thing because it's so much better. But that other thing doesn't come. And so other people's hypothetical blockchains always sound better than NEM, which is a real blockchain. And that's the noise, and we can't get around it, which is a problem.
Well, I would argue that we probably can get around it. We might need to innovate on how we get there, you know. But I think what you're saying is interesting. I think, you know, yeah, living in the venture capital world for a bit or seeing that space, you know, sometimes people say no proof is sometimes better than proof, right? Like once a company goes live, sometimes companies can raise money more easily on hypotheticals, just in a pure psyche, right? Like it's always easier to kind of sell a vision, right? And I think in the blockchain space, there was a lot of vision sold, and not, I mean, if you were to compare it to any other capital infusion and the output of that capital infusion, this is right. Like we don't know yet what will be the outcome. And this is actually one of the things that concerns me is that I feel like there's actually been a lot of innovation. And what worries me a bit, and that maybe hear your thoughts here, and we are running a little bit short on time, but I would like to get your thoughts on this point. You know, what we do at Mousebell, we don't have a blockchain, right? So for us, we can be a bit more neutral. We don't have a dog in the fight, right? So I think we can have certain conversations at enterprise or corporate innovation that maybe are a bit different than anyone coming where they might be perceived to have a bias, right? And what I see, and especially, you know, we have a part of our education stuff, we have the Education Alliance, so NEM is a part of that, and Ripple and Stellar and Neo and Tron, right? We have pretty much every blockchain company we brought together to kind of talk about evolution of education, right? So we have access to these guys. Well, on one half, we're having conversations with, you know, decent corporate partners, right? Where it's like, they kind of tried some pilots in 2018 and 2019. They're kind of trying to figure out blockchain. And as I mentioned earlier, I increasingly find that there was like one guy who was like the dude who was in love with blockchain. He was really pushing for this pilot internally. Maybe he left, maybe he switched companies. Maybe there was budget cuts, especially now during, you know, what we're experiencing like global markets. I think I'm seeing maybe blockchain is going to get the cut a little bit where people don't necessarily want to deploy as many tests or theories, right? That they're going down to kind of cost savings. And then the other half, I'm talking to companies that, you know, are in the blockchain space, have protocols, and I find that they're like, hey, Patrick, we've tried it. You know, we talked to the major retailers, the supply chain companies, or the healthcare companies, and we kind of went down the path with them to do a pilot, right? And then, so I think there was a certain amount of diligence from blockchain companies that people might not understand, where they were trying to really prove their technology at scale, but then they ran into friction where, you know, and now, so I talk to certain platforms and they're throwing their hands up saying, I heard that story before, right? Like I'm not sure I want to go down this whole path to potentially do a pilot with this company. So I do think there's a bit of a disconnect between maybe blockchain companies or protocols have gone down this path. They are a little bit disillusioned to just how easy and open these corporations are going to be to let them deploy their technology at scale. The corporations are, you know, hey, we've ran 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pilots. I feel like a lot of those end up being for PR, not necessarily for substance. And so I'm really worried, right? Where I look and saying, okay, now I'm seeing everybody default to Hyperledger, right? And I'm like, was this how it was supposed to go? Was blockchain Hyperledger, right? Or like, so I'm just, I guess and not to drag it on too long. And again, we could go on this for a while, but just curious, how's your guys' experience been? Have you found these corporate partners to be good stewards of their partnership? Have you hit roadblocks there? You know, have you had frustrating times? Is this something you're gung-ho about or you're thinking twice about now in your approach?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple problems. There's, you know, that blockchain bump, which is what you were talking about whenever somebody announces a proof of concept. I'm so-and-so, we're doing a blockchain trial, and this is the blockchain, and they get a blockchain bump. They're in the news more, investors invest on their stock market more. That's a real thing that happens, and a lot of people wanted to be a part of that. A lot of people also want to be a part of blockchain as a whole, and they have a really good idea, but then they find out that it's just not scalable or as secure as they originally thought, right? And it turns out to be really complicated in some ways to deploy some of these. And so they just kind of give up and are ready to come back to it in a few years. It's going to be super interesting to see how China does with their blockchain. They're talking about, they've announced they're going to use a blockchain to put their own fiat. And if that works, because there's been, project after project, and a lot of big names have announced that they're doing blockchain, but haven't actually done it, haven't actually rolled it out in a meaningful way. And if, China actually launches fiat on a blockchain, or Facebook launches Libra on a blockchain, I think a lot of these other companies that did trials and felt like the technology wasn't mature enough or ready enough might be willing to revisit it in 2022 or 2023. And, Bitcoin has proven that blockchain is ready to be used as money on the internet for some use cases. But as far as, deploying a countrywide blockchain that's going to handle a big part of the economy, that's never been proven. And we kind of need that to take it to the next level.
Well, for everybody listening, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I have. I think Jeff has a lot of good insight, and again, I think especially in this space with how new it is, you can't necessarily put a price on, 3, 4, 5 years of in-depth knowledge, right? And I think we would be remiss as a community to kind of not take lessons from what we've gone through in the past. There'll probably be some reflection of them and how we end up in the future. But in our last 2 or 3 minutes here, Jeff, and again, I think we won't know until everybody's watching, but maybe 3,000 to 5,000 students are listening to you right now. For a 19, 20, 21, 22-year-old kid kind of in college right now, CS major, data science major, that's maybe thinking about kind of taking the leap into blockchain, or decide, do they go get a job at Amazon or Google or Facebook, or, kind of maybe join the Bitcoin drug dealing world their mom warned them about. What advice would you give to them? Like, how would you approach it if you're, in their position now? And again, hindsight 2020. And then what are some of the tools that NEM provides where that they can maybe quickly ramp up, or, play with the product, ideate, and really maybe use NEM as a core in their learning evolution?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's one, I would say, become very familiar with a blockchain platform, whether that's Bitcoin and learning how to use the op return to anchor things to Bitcoin or Ethereum, learning how to write in Solidity, or learning Hyperledger, or learning NEM. Pick a blockchain, become really familiar with how to deploy very fast proof of concepts with it. And in NEM, we do that very easy because we are offering different SDKs. If you're a JavaScript developer and you just want a JavaScript SDK and you can build a front end really quickly, and you want to integrate your front end with the back end of a blockchain network, we can do that for you, or Java, right? Or some other languages. So that's kind of the power of NEM, is that you don't have to learn how to program with an op return, or you don't have to learn a new language like Solidity. We're just offering up an SDK for you to do calls, and then you're building your front end and your business logic with the APIs that we give you. And I think that that's a very great way for developers to get into blockchain very quickly. I've had a lot of developers that literally told me they were working on weeks just trying to build like a simple faucet or something on Bitcoin, and they couldn't get it to work. And then within one weekend, they had deployed their faucet on NEM. And so that's one of the things about NEM, is we've attracted a lot of junior developers that couldn't quite get their projects to work, a lot of students that now can deploy that and show it for class projects. It's a wonderful blockchain to do that.
And where do you want to send people to kind of get some of this documentation and get started?
Sure. So if somebody wants to build on the first version of NEM, which has been around for more than 5 years, you can go to nem.io. And if somebody follows the links in there, you can find all the documentation for the first version of NEM. The second version of NEM is called Symbol, and we have that the developer developer center is available at nemtech at GitHub. So if you look at our GitHub or even nem.io, will redirect you to our Symbol Developer Center so they can get started. Super easy. We've almost never have anybody that comes in and says that they couldn't get it to work. It's almost always that people are really pleased with how easy it was.
For anybody watching, you'll find all the links below. Go check out NEM. And again, Jeff, I appreciate this conversation. This is your McDouble moment.
No, it was great.
Everybody's getting Patrick McLain and Jeff McDonald. This is your McDouble moment.
So
hey, we there you go. We have 60 seconds here before we hop off. But any final words, Jeff?
Yeah, if you want to follow our updates, you can follow us on Twitter at NEM Official. And just our website, we have a Telegram group. We have a Telegram group with only developers. If you come into our main Telegram group and you ask for the developer group, we can put you in that group. And that's really wonderful because you don't have the noise of people talking about price or news. It's just developers asking and answering questions. And there's hundreds of developers familiar with the NEM protocol that are in there to help each other out. Yeah.
That's one takeaway I've been having from this conversation. We need to cut out some of this noise in the community and really dig deep and find the platforms that we like, and we need the smart people to validate them. And only one way we're going to figure it out. We got to put in the hard work to get there. So, Jeff, it was very nice talking to you, and I think we should definitely continue it again. For everybody watching, we appreciate you, tuning in for this interview. And obviously we have this going on for 72 hours. And Jeff, I appreciate your time. It was very nice meeting you.
Thank you very much for having me. And this conference is a really great idea. I'm super glad I can participate.
Have a good one. From Oklahoma, right?
Yes, I'm here in Oklahoma, coming out of lockdown. Hope everybody is staying safe and doing well.
Awesome. Very nice talking with you, Jeff.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stay tuned to learn more about the state of blockchain education at major universities all around the world. Reimagine 2020.